So we are moving right along to 13.3, graphing trig functions. Now that we've done amplitude, we're going to add another transformation, and we're going to be looking at vertical shifts. All right, so vertical shifts is moving up or down. So what we know so far is that right here, A, that's our amplitude. And that is multiplying to make it skinnier or wider, stretching or compressing. Now what we're going to look at today is adding or subtracting outside of the function, and that's going to move it up or down. Up is going to be plus, down is going to be minus. So we can kind of see an example here. Black function is our standard sine of x. And if we put a -2 on the outside, it takes all of our points, so like our starting point here, and it shifts it down 2. Takes every point and subtracts 2 and goes down. If we had +2, it would move up. All right, so we're going to get into some examples here of moving these sine or cosine graphs up and down. All right, example number 1, we have y equals cosine x plus 1. So if we know that cosine always starts above the midline, it starts at 1, from there we could just move our point down, move the next point down, move the next point down. If we need to make our table, we can go ahead and make our table as well. So as we get better, we can kind of go without using the table, but we'll stick with it for now. So if we make our table of cosine of x, so we have cosine of x. On our x-axis, we have 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. Cosine always starts above the midline at 1, and then we go 0, -1, 0, finishing back at 1. So what we're going to do is take all these values and add 1. So if we have 1, let's label our graph first. So say we have 1 here, 2 here, -1 here, 2 here, -2 here. Then we've got 90, 180, 270, and 360. I just like to spread my y-axis out because I find it easier to sketch through. As long as we have it labeled accurately, we're good to go. So cosine usually starts at 1. However, now I'm adding 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. 90 is usually at 0. If I add 1, I'm up at 1. 180 is usually at -1. Add 1, I'm at 0. 270 is usually at 0. Add 1, up at 1. And last, 360 is usually at 1. Add 1, we're at 2. Got the same general shape, so we're just going to go ahead and sketch our cosine graph. So we took our graph and we just shifted it up 1. Notice when we add or subtract, move up or down, we're shifting our midline. So our midline went from here and it shifted up with it. Now the middle of the graph is at where our vertical shift is. It's at 1. And we're still starting up above that new midline. Example 2 is y equals sine of x minus 2. So I'd like you to go ahead and try this one on your own. Graph it whether with the table or just knowing where the points are and shifting them. But I'd like you to go ahead and try this one on your own, pause the video, and then play the video to check your work. All right, hopefully we have this graph here. So our first point's at 0, -2. Our next point's at 90, -1, 180, -2, 270, -3, and 360, -2. And our midline shifted down to that -2. That's going to become important in the next example. So these points are super helpful if we just know where it is. If we find that first point, we should hopefully just be able to bounce up and down and start getting the hang of graphing this a little bit quicker. All All right, so example number 3, graph y equals 2 sine of x plus 1, where we start to put some things together, because here we have 2, which is our amplitude, and then we have plus 1, meaning that our whole graph is going to shift up 1. So we're kind of putting together our amplitude and our vertical shifts here. So what we know is that this is a sine graph, and our sine graph usually starts on our midline. And normally our midline is right on our axis. However, this time it's not going to be on our axis, it's going to shift up 1. So instead of being on our axis, our midline shifts up. So now our midline is located at 1. So this is where all our points are going to come from, is this midline. So if I go ahead and label my y-axis, I have 90, 180, 270, 360. So I know that sine starts on my midline. So I'm going to have a point at 0 on my midline. And from here, I'm going to go up, down, down, up. And my amplitude is 2. So I'm just going to go 2 above, back down to the midline, 2 below, 2 below, back up to my midline, and I have my sine graph that's shifted up 1.
We know that 0, 180,
but with
and
an
360
amplitude
are always
of
going
2.
to be
So I can draw my sine in here.
So if we draw those points,
if you need to make the table, feel free to go ahead and make the table. You
0,
can add from there. But all we have to do is take
we
our
always
midline
know for sine,
from our
they're
x-axis,
going to be on our midline.
shift it up
What's
1,
going to change with the
and then from there we know sine
is
starts on our midline.
90 and
So we start our
270.
first point at
Those
0
are
on our
going to
midline, and then we can just bounce up,
taller
back to our midline, down, back
at
to our
those
midline,
2 points.
and we have
So
our
90,
sine graph. And you can see here
if we have an
that we
amplitude,
have an amplitude
of 2, has to be 2 above our midline.
Our amplitude
so 1, 2,
of 2, and we went
and
up
then 270 is
1.
below, so it's 2.
All right, so example number 4, we want to identify the transformations and write a sine equation, not a cosine equation. We just want to write a sine equation, so let's get rid of that. So in order to do this, we need to identify where the midline is to figure out if we start on or off the midline, so sine or cosine, and then how much we've shifted up or down. So if I establish where my midline is, it's what splits this in half, so it's the same above, same below. So here's my midline. Now I am 1 above, 1 below, so I don't have any amplitude. I didn't multiply. But I start on my midline. So since I start on my midline, that means I have a sine graph. And then I want to figure out, well, how much did I move up or down? Well, here's where we normally start. From this point, we went down 2. So if we go ahead and write this equation, we have y equals, we don't have any amplitude, so we don't have to multiply. We just have sine of x minus 2. And we need these parentheses here because that minus 2 needs to be on the outside of x, since we'll get to what happens when it's on the inside. So minus 2 is on the outside, meaning it moves down. Here we got example number 5. It says identify the transformations and write a cosine equation and a cosine equation. So just a cosine equation. All right, so first thing, identify our midline, where this graph is cut in half. So if I do that, my midline is going to be right here because I have 1 below, 1 above. So if I have 1 below, 1 above, I have no amplitude. But here's my midline, and I start above my midline. So since I start above, I know I have cosine. And usually cosine starts at 1. So cosine normally starts right here. So how much did I shift up? I went up 2. So my equation would be y equals no amplitude, so not multiplying by anything, just cosine of x plus 2. So it's not always how much did it shift from 0, it's how much did it shift from its starting point. And it shifted up 2 from its starting point. So if I look at this point here on the midline, it started at 0 and went up 2 as well. I can check every single point. All right, we got a tricky one here. So example number 6, once again, we're just identifying the one in bold, just cosine. So if you want to go ahead and identify the transformations and write a sine equation, pause the video, do that, and then play the video for the correct answer. We got to bring it all together here. So draw your midline, what cuts your graph in half. So we draw our midline right here. We start on our midline, so it is a sine graph that we're looking at here. And if we look at for an amplitude, we're not just 1 above, we're 3 above. So since we went 3 above our midline, our amplitude is 3. We're multiplying by 3. And then since we went from our starting point for sine from 0 up 1, we have that plus 1. So our equation is y equals 3 times sine of x plus 1. Now go ahead and try your 13.3 worksheet on vertical shifts, getting some more practice with this new skill.